His name is known to the entire world. But do you know how much blood he spilled to become a legend? He is no hero from books, no noble warrior. This is a man who burned half the world to prove he was a god. He grew up in the shadow of paranoia, learned from the wisest, killed the most loyal, and never stopped. He lived as if every day was his last. He died as if the whole world had cursed him. This is a story of boundless glory, of madness that smells of gold and ash. This is Alexander of Macedon, not the great, the cursed. He was born on the night when the temple of Artemis in Ephesus burned. The priests called it a sign. Something great was entering the world, something destined to erase the old and build anew in blood. In the moment when the young god of thunder still cried in his mother's womb, prophetic cities were already perishing. History would remember his name, Alexander. People would call him great, but no one would recall how much blood and pain he had to swallow to earn that title. His father was Philip II, ruthless king of Macedon, strategist, reformer, conqueror, drunkard, a man who loved three things: war, women, and power. His mother was Olympias, an Epirot princess called a sorceress. She whispered to snakes, performed mystical rituals, and until her dying day believed her son was not Philip's. She said, "He was sired by Zeus." And young Alexander grew in this poison, between power, jealousy, myths, and fear. From childhood, he saw the dead. On the training grounds, his father ordered captives beheaded so the boy would grow accustomed to the true cost of victory. He was fed tales of Achilles, Heracles, Perseus. But the worst part, he believed them. Believed that blood was the currency of glory. That gods were not those who prayed, but those who slit throats. At 13, he was handed to Aristotle. Yes, that Aristotle, the great philosopher, Plato's student. But even he could not tame the boy's demons. Alexander listened to lectures on virtue, then at night practiced shooting poisoned arrows in the shade of olive trees. He quoted Homer, but not as a poet, as a war manual. His childhood was no childhood. He had no friends, only rivals, spies, his father's lovers, and knives hidden in the palace's silence. Alexander grew up in an atmosphere of paranoia. His mother told him daily, "Everyone around you wants you dead, even your father." And the boy believed her. Then he learned to kill first. He became a symbol of ambition before he ever saw a real battlefield. At 16, while Philip was at war, Alexander crushed a Thracian rebellion without an army. He simply arrived, obliterated, built a city, and named it Alexandropolis. Why not? He was a teenager with the gaze of a madman and a dream of a world at his feet. Then came the day his father, great, cruel, invincible Philip, died. At a wedding, right at the entrance to the theater. One dagger strike, and the king lay in his blood. Historians still argue. Was it a revolutionary guard? A scorned lover? Or perhaps Olympias' knife, paving the way for her son? Whatever the truth, Alexander took the throne. He was only 20, but he was not afraid, because from youth he had learned to stare death in the eyes, and not blink. As soon as Alexander ascended to the throne at the tender age of 20, his first act as king was to secure his power with ruthless precision. He wasted no time in purging anyone who could pose a threat to his rule. Relatives on his father's side, potential claimants to the Macedonian crown, were swiftly eliminated. Generals who had served under Philip II, men of ambition and influence, were cut down without hesitation. Former allies, once loyal to his father, found themselves marked as enemies if their loyalty wavered. Even his own cousin, Amyntas, a figure who might have rallied dissent, was not spared. The executions were brutal, methodical, and unrelenting. Blood flowed like rivers through the palaces and streets of Macedon, staining the earth with the price of absolute control. But in return, a chilling silence fell over the kingdom. The whispers of rebellion were snuffed out, the murmurs of dissent silenced. Macedon had a new king, and this king was no mere successor. Alexander had no intention of stopping at the rugged borders of the Balkans. His vision stretched far beyond the mountains and valleys of his homeland. toward a destiny that would echo through the ages. He had no desire to simply preserve the legacy of his father, Philip II, whose conquests had already forged Macedon into a formidable power. Philip's achievements, uniting the fractious Greek city-states, reforming the army, and expanding Macedonian influence, were not enough for Alexander. His hunger was not for stability or governance, but for something far greater, a legend that would outshine all others. His eyes were fixed on the vast, sprawling empire of Persia, a colossus that had loomed over the Greek world for centuries, its shadow a constant humiliation. The Persians, under their great kings, had invaded Greece, burned Athens, and demanded submission. To Alexander, this was not just a political challenge. It was personal. He did not crave Persia's gold, its treasures, or its opulent courts. He sought something intangible, something eternal, a name that would be spoken with awe and fear for generations. He wanted to tear down the empire that had dared to subjugate the Greeks and build his own myth in its place. Thus began the grandest military campaign the ancient world had ever seen, a relentless march that would reshape the map of the known world. Alexander's ambition was boundless, his resolve unbreakable. With an army forged by his father's reforms but fueled by his own charisma, he set out to conquer not just lands, but history itself. Ahead lay battles that would become the stuff of legend. Granicus, where he would smash through Persian defenses with audacious bravery. Issus, where he would face the Persian king Darius III and force him to flee in disgrace. Gaugamela, where he would shatter the last great stand of the Persian Empire. These were not mere victories, they were spectacles of his will. Persian kings fled before him, their crowns and pride abandoned in the dust. Royal daughters, symbols of dynastic power, were claimed as trophies, their fates tied to Alexander's vision of a new world order. Cities fell before him, some opening their gates in awe or fear, surrendering without a fight, while others resisted and paid the ultimate price. Razed to the ground, their populations butchered to the last child as a warning to those who dared defy him. Yet, even as he carved his name into the annals of history, cracks began to appear in the divine image he crafted for himself. Alexander styled himself as more than a king, a god among men, destined to rule by divine right. But the cost of his ambition was becoming clear. The blood of friend and foe alike stained his hands. The loyalty of his men, once unshakable, was tested by the endless march and the horrors they endured. The Macedonian soldiers who had followed him from the hills of their homeland began to whisper of a leader who was drifting further from them, his humanity eroding under the weight of his own myth. The divine image he projected, son of Zeus, conqueror of worlds, was beginning to fracture at the seams, revealing glimpses of the mortal beneath. But that is another chapter in the saga of Alexander, a tale of triumphs and tragedies yet to unfold. He wasn't going to wait. 2 years after his father's death, Alexander stood on the shores of the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Europe from Asia. One crossing, and he would step onto the land of gods and kings, the land of Persia. He was 22. He had 40,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry. Against him stood Darius III, king of kings, ruler of the largest empire on earth. Millions of subjects, gold, mercenaries from across the east. Everything was against Alexander. Everything except one thing. He believed himself immortal. Before crossing, he offered a sacrifice to Achilles. Then he personally threw a spear into the soil of Asia as a symbol that he was claiming it. Not asking, not buying, taking, because he could. His first battle was at the Granicus River. The Persians stood on the hills, their generals laughing. The boy wouldn't pass. But Alexander didn't wait. He charged into the river against the current, against the arrows. He reached the shore himself, began cutting. And within hours, it was over. The Persians were crushed, their commanders killed. Macedon was on enemy soil. Thus began the conquest. He didn't just fight. He annihilated. The city of Mylae burned. Halicarnassus razed to its foundations. But there was also theater. His army didn't just slaughter, it dazzled. Alexander released captives with gold. He welcomed foreigners into his ranks. He allowed the worship of foreign gods, as long as they didn't hinder his empire building. This was no crude butcher. This was a political predator. Everything changed after the Battle of Issus. Darius III came himself. His army was twice as large. Alexander had a wounded thigh, but he didn't retreat. He broke through to the center, straight to the king. And then the unthinkable happened. Darius fled. He abandoned his army, abandoned his mother, wife, children. When Alexander entered Darius' tent, it still smelled of the queen's perfume. Harems, servants, gold, all waiting for the king. And instead, a 23-year-old foreigner with a ferocious gaze walked in. Darius' women fell to their knees, thinking they'd be killed. But Alexander lifted them up and said, "The king is dead. Now I am the king." He took Darius' daughter as his wife, not out of love, but to seal the throne with Persian blood. Next, Egypt. He spilled not a drop of blood. The Egyptians opened their gates themselves. They saw in Alexander a messiah, a man who would crush their Persian oppressors. He didn't argue. Instead, he entered the temple of Ammonius in Siwa. There, the priests proclaimed, "You are the son of a god." It wasn't a metaphor. Alexander believed it. From then on, his gaze changed. He no longer laughed with comrades, no longer drank with common officers. He spoke of his destiny. He believed he was guided not by human ambition, but by the will of the universe. And when someone doubted him, they disappeared. At Gaugamela, Darius threw everything he had. 300,000 warriors, war chariots with scythes, elephants, 7 kilometers of front line. And again, Alexander charged straight into the center. And again, Darius fled. But this time, he wouldn't return. His own satraps betrayed and killed him. Alexander entered Babylon as a god. At the age of 26, Alexander stood at the pinnacle of power, having conquered the mighty Persian Empire, a colossal dominion that had endured for over 2 centuries. The vast territories of Persia, with its opulent palaces, intricate bureaucracy, and seemingly invincible armies, had crumbled under his relentless ambition. Yet, for Alexander, this was not the end but merely the beginning. He did not pause to bask in his triumphs or consolidate his gains as a lesser ruler might have. Instead, he turned his gaze forward, envisioning a new empire that would eclipse all that had come before. In his mind, the concept of Greece as a distinct entity had dissolved. There was no longer a homeland to return to, no small kingdom to satisfy his hunger. There was only Asia, a boundless expanse stretching into the horizon, an endless road of conquest and creation that called to him with a siren's allure. His vision was no longer that of a Macedonian king but of a universal sovereign, a ruler of all lands under the sun. To realize this grand vision, Alexander began to reshape his empire in ways that confounded his followers. He welcomed Persian commanders into the ranks of his army, granting them positions of honor alongside his Macedonian generals. These were men who had once fought against him, yet he saw in them not enemies but tools to forge a new world. He adopted Eastern customs, donning the flowing robes and ornate diadems of Persian royalty, a stark departure from the rugged Macedonian attire his men were accustomed to. More audacious still, he began to demand acts of worship, insisting on proskynesis, a Persian ritual of obeisance that required subjects to bow before their king as if before a god. To the Macedonians, this was an affront. They had followed a general, a warrior king who fought beside them in the mud and blood of battle. Now, they found themselves serving a sun king, a figure who seemed to believe his own divinity. The transformation was jarring, and whispers of discontent rippled through the ranks. But to challenge Alexander was to court death. His temper was as fierce as his ambition, and his wrath was swift. To question his divine pretensions was to risk everything. This growing tension came to a head in a moment of tragic violence involving Clitus the Black, one of Alexander's most trusted companions. Clitus had been with him since the beginning, a stalwart friend who had saved Alexander's life at the Battle of Granicus, shielding him from a fatal blow in the chaos of combat. Yet even this bond, forged in blood and loyalty, could not withstand the strain of Alexander's transformation. During a drunken feast, the air thick with wine and resentment, Clitus could no longer contain his frustration. In a fit of inebriated anger, he stood and hurled a stinging rebuke at his king. "You're not a god. You're the son of your drunken father." The words cut deep, striking at the heart of Alexander's carefully crafted divine image and invoking the shadow of Philip II, whose legacy Alexander both revered and sought to surpass. The room fell silent, the revelry frozen. In an instant, Alexander's rage erupted. Seizing a spear, he drove it through Clitus' chest, killing his friend and savior in a single brutal act. The deed was done in seconds, but its weight would haunt Alexander for the rest of his days. He was said to have wept bitterly over Clitus' body, overcome with grief and remorse. Yet even this tragedy could not halt his relentless march forward. Driven by a vision that brooked no dissent, no matter the cost, Alexander killed his own friend and sat over the body for a long time. He wept, but he didn't stop, because what's one more corpse when you're conquering the world? But the true horror lay ahead in the east, because Alexander went further. After Babylon, he wanted to reach the edge of the earth, into the depths of India, where no European foot had trod. And then death and madness. In Babylon, Alexander could have stopped. He could have gone down in history as the greatest victor of all time. He already owned Persia, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Mediterranean. But it wasn't enough. Crowns and throne rooms no longer interested him. He was drawn to the edges of the world. He wanted to reach the place where the sun rises, where immortals live, where he could become not just a god, but the universe itself. He marched east, into the unknown, into wild, dangerous territory where kings didn't rule, they survived. Thus began the Indian campaign, a campaign that turned his army into a ghost. The enemy there was different, not Persians, not traitors, but stone, jungles, heat, poison. India didn't surrender. It exhausted, and there, Alexander met a true opponent, King Porus, a tall, dark-skinned giant who rode into battle on an elephant, like a living mountain. His army, hundreds of war elephants, armor that crushed the earth. The Battle of Hydaspes was one of the bloodiest in Alexander's career. The cavalry bogged down in mud. Elephants crushed ranks. Rain poured over faces. But even then, victory. King Porus was captured and brought to Alexander. They asked him, "How do you wish to be treated?" He replied, "As a king." Alexander liked the answer, and he left Porus to rule, in the name of the empire, because even a defeated enemy could be useful if he knew his place. But his own soldiers began forgetting theirs. The army was tired, exhausted. They were on the other side of the world, sick, worn out, without hope of return. And when Alexander wanted to go further, they said, "No," plain and firm. It was the first no he had heard in 10 years. He wept, he threatened, he sulked, but he was forced to turn back. He led them home through the Gadrosian desert, a place where no one survives. And there, his army lost more men than in any battle. To hunger, to dehydration, to a sun that burned even shadows. Alexander marched at the front, not on an elephant, not in a litter, on foot. He drank the same water as his soldiers, but his eyes held something else. There was no fear left in him, no regret, only a steely gaze on an empire meant to be eternal. When he returned to Babylon, he was different. Not a hero, not a young king, a silent fanatic with an incomprehensible idea. To mix all peoples, erase nations, create a new race. The race of Alexander. He married thousands of his soldiers to Persian women, began relocating entire tribes, held a grand wedding in Susa, where he and 80 generals married together. It wasn't a feast, it was political alchemy. He was turning people into cogs of a new order, but no one understood it. Macedonians hated his Persian ways. Eastern subjects feared his Western cruelty. The empire was cracking, and then it began to die. His friend and lover Hephaestion, the only one he trusted, died suddenly. Alexander fell into hysterics. He didn't eat, didn't sleep, wept for weeks. After that, he was broken. In May 323 BCE, he fell ill. Suddenly, fever, weakness. They laid him on marble to cool his body, but it burned. Doctors stood in shock. No one understood what was wrong. Poison? Malaria? Exhaustion? Divine punishment? He lay in Nebuchadnezzar's palace. Around him gold, wine, weapons, trophies, and no answers. His eyes wandered. He no longer spoke. His body weakened. His hands didn't move. The empire froze. Soldiers came to see him. A procession of thousands, silent, weeping. They saw not a god. They saw a dying body that still breathed. When asked, "To whom do you leave the empire?" he whispered, "To the strongest." It wasn't an answer. It was a curse, because a few days later he was gone. His body didn't decay for over a week. People believed he had become a god, but the empire collapsed. Generals turned into wolves. They waged war over the spoils. His mother killed to preserve her son's name. His son, an infant, was strangled in his crib. Everything he built crumbled. Except one thing, the legend. Today they call him great. But who else could swallow half the world, become a god, and die at 32? They call him great. But what does that word mean when you spit it through gritted teeth over the bones of 1,000 cities? Alexander was not a god, nor even a king. He was hunger, thirst, an abyss that lives in everyone who wants more. A palace wasn't enough, he wanted thrones. A woman wasn't enough, he took the daughters of kings. The world wasn't enough, he wanted the stars. His life was a sword strike across the map of the world. He didn't rule an empire, he burned it. Fought, married, betrayed, killed, wept, and fought again. He left behind no libraries, no temples, no schools of philosophy. Just a body, embalmed in a golden sarcophagus, as a warning, "Don't go where I went." His empire was stillborn. It didn't survive even a few years after his death. His friends turned into murderers. His heirs were slaughtered. His name remained, but did the man? He became a legend because he died young. Had he lived another 10 years, we might remember him as a tyrant, a fanatic, a madman, but death caught him when he still shone. Like a meteor, like an explosion, like an apology to history. No one has repeated his path, because to repeat it means to walk through madness, blood, paranoia, and eternal loneliness. He was surrounded by thousands, but none saw him fully. He had no friends, only a shadow and a prophecy he created himself. Alexander of Macedon was not great. He was the last to believe he could become a god and die without ever becoming human.